It was almost an exact copy of the Mark III, by the way. Um, all right. I guess we can move to the Atoms for Peace program. Again, I mean, I do think that had Baruch not insisted on his points, there might have been more discussion of the concepts that were sound. That might have done some good. But the idea that you were going to reach an agreement with folks dead certain to get the bomb and were run by a guy like Stalin, I mean, it just doesn't sound right either. So, I mean, I don't know if that helps a little to kind of juggle the two equities of the debate between the scientist movement and the people who are hard edged against doing anything unless we had a veto over the Russians. Okay, let's take a look at what happened after 49. Next slide. Well, you have this famous report called NSC 68, and it has quite a lot about the new character of the threat, because now it wasn't whether or not Russia was going to get a bomb. They had gotten a bomb. Not only that, but it was argued that, well, there still would be some utility in having arms control that prevented them from getting enough weapons to knock us out. Well, what does that mean? Well, we just fought a war where Rosie the Riveter had managed to make enough tanks, planes, and ships to pretty much sink the Axis powers. We had sanctuary for Rosie and 100 of the major cities that were production centers for all of these military goods. If someone got enough bombs to knock out those 100 cities, it was thought, they could win World War II again. Now, never mind that World War II was World War II, and what we would be fighting would be World War III. People like thinking about the last war. I was just asked to write an essay not long ago on how to win the next Cold War. And I pointed out, I said, it's a little bit like asking us how to win World War One again or something. We're not going to fight that war again. They didn't catch it either. They said, well, if we were going to fight World War II, we would want to make sure we still had sanctuary for those 100 production centers. If they get enough bombs and bombers to knock those out, we will lose, was the thought. And that was reflected in this report. They also came to the conclusion that if that was so, there might be utility in preventing Russia from ever getting that number of bombs, which they supposed would be, I think, what was it, 200 bombs. And the thinking was, well, half of them would get shot down by our air defenses, and the other half would get through. And so all you needed were 200 because 100, would get through if you had 200. And they said, well, the critical date, if memory serves me, would be 1954. They had 4 years. How often are there presidential elections? Anybody remember? That's a rhetorical question. Someone should answer immediately.
I think it might be around 4 years.
There you go. Okay. Now, I'm not sure they were thinking that way, but you know how that works. We think in 2 and 4 year increments for obvious reasons. So anyway, the report. I wonder if there's anything from the report. Did I pull anything on the slides? I'm doing this from memory. What's the next slide? Well, there are the 100 cities. You can check and see whether you're one of them. I noticed Salt Lake didn't make it then. It wasn't much to Salt Lake then. Well, it'd probably be on there now, but that was the concept. But what they said is if you could get the Soviets to agree to limit their fissile production, you could probably keep them from getting those 200 bombs. And that would be worth something. But then they said, I'm not sure they would agree because of the probable benefits of civil nuclear energy. and that might, be a difficult thing to sacrifice. So they were already very much under the spell of the promise of nuclear energy too cheap to meter. We're still waiting for that. It hasn't quite happened yet, but they thought it was right around the corner. Some of them. Okay, next slide. Okay, here we go. There it is. It says, here we go. 40 to, by the way, this is good enough for government work in the 50s. And this tells you probably what's good enough for government work today, which probably tells you why you didn't know it, but you all have a recessive Reagan gene, and that is you want some of your money back. I mean, look at this. The estimate is it's believed the Soviets cannot deliver their bombs on target, but a planning estimate might be 40 to 60%. You divide the difference. You don't really know. They were talking about air defenses. Nobody knew how effective they'd be. Anyway, so they say, well, let's assume 50%. Then it goes on to argue for planning purposes, therefore, the date they will possess 200 bombs will be the critical date. There you go. For delivery of 100. And I think as I say, the initial estimate was 54. Now, I mean, the beauty of this, I've needled this, beginning kind of poke fun at it, but at least it can be wrong. I mean, it's pretty specific. Goes a lot. There's more than adjectives and adverbs. There's some numbers here and dates. This, so this is pretty good. All right, next slide. All right. Well, let's back up just a little. What happened? You can keep this up. Well, NSC 68 came and went. Truman was encouraged, I think, probably by Oppenheimer. I'll have to take a look. To try to figure out, well, now that it's clear that the Baruch plant's DOA are dead on arrival, what should we do perhaps to promote these concepts or concerns with regard to arms control? And so they created a panel of consultants in 52, which completed, I believe it was 52, maybe it was earlier, but they completed their work in 52. And they came out with a set of recommendations to prevent a knockout blow. And, it must have been in 52 because they finished in January 53. And they said, well, it can only be decisive if they're delivered on target in considerable numbers. Now, if you go back, I believe, to the Frank report or the Jeffries report, there is this kind of argument there too that, well, of course, you really wouldn't go to war until you had about 100 and some odd weapons. So it's even in the Acheson, Lilienthal, and Baruch and Jay Jeffries and Dr. Frank period of 44 to 46, there is this notion floating around, well, maybe you wouldn't just go to war if you had one weapon. Maybe you'd wait until you had a few. But now they say a considerable number. And the American requirement for a knockout attack on the Soviet Union now runs into 4 figures. That's 1,000. That's not 150. It seems reasonable to say that much would be achieved if it should be possible to get a reduction in the size of the stockpiles and bombing fleets such that neither side need fear a sudden attack from the other. Now, what they did, go to the next slide if you would. Oh, well, now things get interesting. Part 2, it argued, the panel consultants, well, Oppenheimer was a big fan of air defense. He thought air defense should be the big spend, not hydrogen weapons. And of course, what we ended up doing is both. This is sort of the American approach. But he didn't want the hydrogen bomb, at least for a while. And he said, well, he thought you could knock down 4 out of 5 with air defense, which is pretty good air defense. I'm not sure we experienced that in the Second World War, I can tell you that. Anyway, he then says, right now we'd be lucky to get 1 in 5. The Soviet Union may be able to destroy our economy beyond the hope of recovery when she has 15,000 atomic bombs, while she might well be able when she has as few as 600. The lower figure might be achieved in a few years. The upper is not out of reach within the next is 2 decades. Well, see, that would be 1970. Now, this is a pretty elastic set of numbers. Yeah? You can see there's a certain sort of rhetorical flair here. I mean, I don't know how scientific this is, but what this allows you politically and bureaucratically to do is say, well, we have an urgent problem. We still have a few more years because now it's not 200. You notice it's 600. And then you can say, but of course, if you buy my argument and you build lots of air defenses and you spend a lot of money and they work, well, you're not really in trouble until they have 15,000 and you have 20 years. That's pretty thin soup. But nobody criticized him on this basis, not even Eisenhower. Nobody even seemed to, they took all this seriously. I think you can see in here the manipulation of facts and figures to get the policy you want. But people didn't see this. They didn't impugn the motive. I think Oppenheimer was playing a little fast and loose. And the reason they believed him is they believed the knockout blow stockpile was the problem. And they thought this was science. You can tell I'm skeptical about all this. I mean, I laughed when I finally found a friend of mine found this and showed it to me, I don't know, 40 years ago. And I remember seeing it and going, wow, that's bizarre. Let's go to the next page.